From San Francisco, this is Peter Mintun's Music in the Air. Music in the Air, original music of the 1920s and 30s, coming to you from the studios of KALW San Francisco. Now, here is your host, Peter Mintun.
Thank you, David. And as I've mentioned on other broadcasts, that was Jim Roseveare at the Oakland Paramount Wurlitzer and myself playing our opening theme song. And for those listeners to Music in the Air who have requested that we play more organ and piano duets, well, you're in luck today because Mr. Roseveare, Jim Roseveare, the popular organist, is on the broadcast today. And Jim, welcome to Music in the Air.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, before we do a lot of talking, may we hear one of your pipe organ specialties on the Wurlitzer? One of your solos?
Oh, absolutely. This is an arrangement that was made by a friend of mine who used to be one of the organists at Radio City Music Hall in New York. It's the great old Cole Porter tune, It's De Lovely, and this is the arrangement that my friend Ashley Miller made.
Thank you very much, Jim Roseveare on the Oakland Paramount Wurlitzer. And that's a great tune, and I think a good opener for Music in the Air. And listeners may be wondering how we got together. We've been friends, actually, since the late 1960s, and I first heard Jim Roseveare playing at the Avenue Theater out on San Bruno Avenue when they used to have regular series of silent films. And you were not ever playing the silent movies, were you?
No, I just did solo work, and of course we also had a radio broadcast from there, and I did much of the work on that also.
That's right, that was on a San Jose station, wasn't it?
Yes, that's true. It was on KBAY, if memory serves.
Well, anyway, those were some great musical days for me. I really enjoyed hearing some of the organists who play there, especially you, and a lot of people were saying, well, gee, you and Jim Roseveare have similar repertoire and taste, you ought to get together and do some duets. But did it ever happen?
Well, not until recently.
Oh, the way it did happen was that David Fowler wanted to do a broadcast from the Oakland Paramount featuring 1920s and 30s pipe organ music, and Jim was the natural choice because Jim's the staff organist there. And so we did a little on-the-spot improvisation, and the broadcast was a great success. In fact, Peter Botto, the manager of the theater, asks us later to put a concert together. And so we did on Mother's Day in 1985, and it was very well received. And to give you an idea, to give the listeners an idea of how we sound together, this is what we opened with. It's by Bronislaw Kaper, and it is the theme song from the Rosalind Russell film, Auntie Mame. And this is how we opened our concert at the theater, Rising from the Orchestra Pit. I don't think I've ever played more black notes in my life than when we did that arrangement. That was Auntie Mame by Bronislaw Kaper. He's the same man who composed on Green Dolphin Street and many other famous film songs, including San Francisco, which is one of the official city songs of San Francisco. And Jim, apparently the Paramount Theater in Oakland goes back a long way in your life, too. Didn't you first hear that theater organ on the radio?
Yeah, I did. As a matter of fact, it was, and I don't even remember what station it was over, but it was very obscure. And one night I was tuning around the radio dial, and I heard a sound that was very appealing to me. And it turned out that it was June Melody playing at the original organ in the Oakland Paramount. The one we have there now is not the original, with some guy reading some bits of doggerel verse in the background. But the sound completely captivated me.
Well, the place is completely captivating to anyone who walks in, since it was beautifully restored, in 1973?
That's right, that's right.
And some of our listeners may have been to the grand reopening celebration, which featured, among others, Henry Fonda, Milton Berle, Lola Falana, John Scott Trotter, and Jim Roseveare was playing at the time, it was a rented electronic organ because they hadn't installed the current Wurlitzer. And I was playing up in the mezzanine bar on a concert grand. So it was great fun to be involved in the renovation of the Oakland Paramount and the big opening performance there that night. And it was also a great pleasure to just be in the building. It's so beautiful. Why don't we try another of our duets together? Tell the listeners about My Love Song.
Well, as many people know, Jesse Crawford was about the biggest time theater organist in the world back in the heyday of these instruments. And he made a concert tour in England in the early 30s. While he was there, he recorded for his master's voice, which was the English counterpart of the Victor Talking Machine Company, 8 sides. But he didn't do it the usual way. Instead of being in a very tightly controlled studio environment, he actually recorded in a big theater. Now, only 2 of those sides were released over here, and I'm lucky to have them. And so this is a tune called My Love Song, and it shows very well how we sort of back-chat the organ and the piano. This was originally just simply an organ solo with a vocal refrain. Now we have no vocal refrain, but we've got 2 instruments, the piano and the organ.
Gee, that's fun to do. And for those just tuning in, this is Peter Mintun, and you're listening to Music in the Air. My guest is the popular radio organist Jim Roseveare, and we were just playing an English pop tune called My Love Song on piano and organ in the Oakland Paramount Theater. And what great fun that was. Now, Jim, earlier you were talking about the heyday of the theater. Now, that was so long ago that probably many of our young listeners don't know when the heyday of the theater organ was.
Well, it was approximately, let's say 1918 to the advent of talking pictures, rounding it off with, say, 1930. They were used to accompany silent pictures. In the larger installations, they were used to relieve the orchestras, which also accompanied the silent pictures, for certain shows, because they were very well adapted to the purpose. They were all under the control of one person, so an improvisation to film on the screen was a much simpler matter than trying to have 40 musicians in the pit do it. And besides that, the theater owners and managers had only to pay one salary rather than 40 salaries. And it was a very sumptuous sound. It was a sound practically unknown now. Its appeal was very physical. You can, when you hear one of these, you not only hear it, you feel it also.
Well, you were telling one of the interviewers during the time we were doing the Mother's Day concert in 1985 at the Paramount about the fact that movie theaters back then were in constant use.
Oh, yes, absolutely. They were running from 9 in the morning till midnight, and then in many instances back into the wee hours of the morning for rehearsals and scene changes and what have you when there was variety presented. So they were in constant use, and unlike today when one can go into a movie theater even at a so-called peak hour, and maybe the place will be half full, these places were very near full for every show.
And the pipe organs were built to withstand all that traffic.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. They were very much a piece of commercial, industrial equipment.
Well, were they an extravagance, or were even the small neighborhood theaters capable of affording a pipe organ?
Oh, yeah. In fact, most of the theaters had them. I'm amused frequently at the inaccuracies that we see regarding silent pictures. The cliche is to have an out-of-tune piano clanking away in the background. This was hardly done at all after the start of the First World War. Even the smallest theaters usually had some kind of a little organ.
And I've heard on a television show that the Paramount's organ was voted, at least by, I think it was KPIX, as the largest or the best.
The best in the Bay Area.
In the Bay Area, but you told me it isn't really the largest necessarily, is it?
Well, yes, I guess at this point it is the largest, but by an almost insignificant margin.
And many of them have a lot of percussive effects in them, and oftentimes theater organ is mistakenly associated with loud, razzle-dazzle arrangements of sometimes hackneyed tunes played on many of the percussion instruments. But Jim, honestly, this isn't exactly your style at all, is it?
No. We must remember that a lot of those percussion instruments were put on there for the purposes of sound effects for the accompanying of the movies. Doorbells, car horns, sirens, horses' hooves, this sort of thing. And used judiciously, they can be very effective. Unfortunately, a lot of people simply regard it as a sort of immense gadget and tend to relegate the musical side of it to a much lower place than all the gadgetry and gimmick aspects of it.
Well, I would very much like to hear, and I know our listeners would like to hear, an organ played very romantically and poetically. And what kind of thing do you have up your sleeve in that line?
Well, it's interesting you should ask, because the next tune is one that I in fact, was just flipping through some music and decided to read through it. I remember having heard it and decided just to try it on the organ, and it turned out so well that I made a full arrangement of it. It's the Frank Lesser tune from 1943 or 44, called Spring Will Be a Little Late This Year.
Now, Frank Lesser's the fellow that wrote Guys and Dolls.
Guys and Dolls, yeah. Frank Lesser had a very, very great output, and he's one of those people that wasn't a particularly vocal self-publicizer, and a lot of things that we take for granted as just standards, if you look at the music, you'll see it's written by Frank Lesser. Frank Lesser's work is extremely good, in my opinion, and I think this next tune is one of his best.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, here is Jim Roseveare at the console of the Paramount Wurlitzer with Spring Will Be a Little Late This Year. Gee, that's a lovely tune. Was that from a show or a film? Or?
As far as I know, that was from a picture called Christmas Holiday with Deanna Durbin.
Ah, well, very lovely number. I must say that when we were organizing our piano and organ duets, one of the numbers that you and I both wanted to do was Moonlight on the Ganges. I'm not quite sure why, but there's just something very attractive about that tune. I've heard some old piano rolls of it, and Paul Whiteman recorded it. A lot of people recorded this tune. But I must now admit, I'll come to the forefront and admit I stole a lot of the little phrases in this arrangement from a piano roll, a Welty Minion piano roll, I believe played by Howard Lutter. But one of the neat things about this is it's from that school of music that was called the Oriental Foxtrot that was popular in the teens and 20s. Titles like Dardanella, that's one, and Hindustan, and Mummy Mine is one, but I think this one really takes the cake. It not only crosses the musical boundaries, but geographical boundaries as well. This is our arrangement of Moonlight on the Ganges. Moonlight on the Ganges. That was me, Peter Mintun, at the piano, and Jim Roseveare at the Oakland Paramount Wurlitzer, and you're tuned in to Music in the Air. And my guest is Jim Roseveare, who is one of the country's finest pop organists and has been touring around. You did New York State earlier in this year, didn't you?
Yeah, upstate New York, actually more around the border of Lake Ontario.
And I understand you're going to England?
Yes, in October.
That should be fun. Is it a theater, a cinema organ you're playing there?
Yes, but it's not in its original location. It's been restored and reinstalled by a group of enthusiasts over there.
Well, you know, you were talking about Jesse Crawford recording in London in the actual cinema itself. Now, in the States, was it usually recorded in a studio or what?
Well, yeah, in the vast bulk of his output. Let's just talk about the Victor records because that was by far the greatest. He was usually in a very acoustically neutral studio on an organ designed, or if not designed, at least regulated and voiced for recording and broadcasting.
Mm-hmm. Well, on many of the English records I've heard from the 20s and 30s, there is a very live room sound, and it says right on the label, recorded in the Regal Cinema or Marble Arch, etc.
Right. I don't know what the deal actually was, Peter, because the recording engineers of the time over here seemed to think that the acoustical environment of a theater would send all their equipment all cross-eyed and they wouldn't get a good recording. But all those foreign organ records proved that to be wrong, and so I don't know why we didn't do more of that until much later over here.
It's a very pleasant sound, I think, to hear the actual theater room acoustics, and that's what we're hearing today, that's for sure. You know, I think our listeners would like to know a little bit more about you, because you're an example of another young person who is involved with very deeply, very intensely with music of someone else's era, not your own, and you've really made it your own, and people know you as a specialist, who plays the primarily 20s, 1930s, and actually, is there a limit to your preference of years, or does that come into being?
No, not really. I think we should go at it backwards. I don't have any particular interest in just playing the music of the 20s and the 30s and that sort of thing. But it certainly seems that most of the best music was written then. Now, there are things that I like from the 50s, 60s, 70s, but by far, as you obviously realize too, by far I think the best stuff was written in the 20s and 30s.
Well, let's do another one of our duets, and this is by a composer named James F. Hanley, and the name is not familiar to most people, although he did write for the screen and for the stage, and if he is not immortalized for having written Rose of Washington Square, he certainly should not be forgotten for doing Second-Hand Rose. And it comes from a show called, what's this from? Thumbs Up, isn't it? 1934 it opened, and it's called Zing Went the Strings of My Heart. Jim Roseveare at the organ and myself, Peter Mintun, at the piano. That was Zing Went the Strings of My Heart. Now, you're rather a specialist in Jesse Crawford, and I would like to request something in the style of Jesse Crawford. And I think you know more about Jesse than just about anybody.
Well, thank you. I probably don't, but this is a greatly exaggerated thing. I started to learn when I was first learning how to play the organ. I taught myself by listening to the records over and over again some of Crawford's arrangements because they constituted such a wonderfully economical and enjoyable way to learn the niceties of absolutely musical chord voicing, voice leading, harmonization, counter melodies, phrasing. All of those good things are contained in practically everything Crawford did, and in the bargain they make nice listening. And as a result of that, I've gotten this reputation of being a Crawford expert. Well, there was only one Crawford expert, and that was Crawford. And even though I can duplicate his arrangements, I certainly can't come anywhere near the delicious musicality that he got. But it still comes off fairly well.
Well, you and he do actually, you share the same approach, I think, which is straightforward and highly musical.
Well, that's the thing. Crawford's approach was always one of a very vocal sort of approach. It's got all of the lyric qualities that a good singer has.
And that's where he got the nickname, the poet of the organ, right?
I guess so, yeah. Now, I think as an example, one of his solos that he did in very late 1931 was a European piece that had quite a great celebrity over here. The big record of it was made by Russ Colombo, but I think the really good record of it was made by Crawford. Here is Jesse Crawford's arrangement of Call Me Darling.
Oh, good. was lovely, Jim. Thank you very much. Jesse Crawford's arrangement of Call Me Darling. You're tuned into Music in the Air, where we're listening to the fabulous Oakland Paramount Wurlitzer organ, and Jim Roseveare is my guest on the broadcast, and I think he's truly one of the artists of the pipe organ capable of turning a mass of seething, wheezing, moaning pipes into what you could call soft, poetic music. Now, Jim, will you favor us with another of your ballad solos?
Well, yeah, this is a beauty. I was in a restaurant one time, and coming over the Muzak was a beautiful tune, and I knew I'd heard it before, and I couldn't, however, think of what the name was. So I jotted down a few bars of it and hummed it and whistled to several people, and finally learned that it was Two Cigarettes in the Dark, a beautiful tune from a show called Kill That Story.
That sounds festive.
Right. The piece is written by Lou Pollack and Paul Francis Webster, and I like it so much I spent a great deal of time and made quite a elaborate arrangement of it, and I think it lends itself beautifully to the organ. Here's Two Cigarettes in the Dark.
Oh, Jim, thank you. That is one of the loveliest arrangements of that song ever made. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. You know, I got to thinking as we prepared for the concert that without Paul Whiteman, a concert like we're doing would not have been made possible, because back in 1924, when he did his experiment in American music at Aeolian Hall, at which Rhapsody in Blue was introduced, that wasn't a common practice to have popular music played in a concert hall in front of an audience. And so we are indebted to him for nurturing the talents of many people like Ferdy Grofé and Rube Bloom, Peter DeRose, and a young lady named Dana Suisse. And the reason I'm mentioning her right now is because of the next selection. Dana Suisse made her debut at Carnegie Hall in 1932 with Paul Whiteman's orchestra, playing a concerto in 3 rhythms, which was later repeated before an audience of something like 18,000 people at Madison Square Garden. And she became nicknamed the Girl Gershwin. And in 1934, on the Kraft Music Hall, the Paul Whiteman's radio show, they introduced another of her compositions with the composer at the piano called Blue Moonlight. And I think it lends itself especially well to organ and piano because because it's a piano feature, there's that middle rather reminiscent of the Gershwin writing. And why don't you tell the listeners something about how we arranged this for piano and organ?
Well, it really lent itself very well to the piano and organ arrangement because the thing is essentially a little piano concerto for piano and orchestra. Well, the character of the Wurlitzer is so orchestral that it became a simple matter simply to translate the orchestral parts, or as much of the orchestral material as we could, to the organ and keep the piano parts intact so we wouldn't have to compromise any of those. The source we used was the Adolf Deutsch arrangement that he made for Whiteman's orchestra for that Kraft Music Hall broadcast, and it just worked out extremely well, I think.
I think so, too. And incidentally, I talked to Dana Suisse just a few days before our concert, at which we reintroduced this, and she said, well, darling, it might interest you to know that this has not been played in public for 50 years in that original arrangement. And so now we offer, for your enjoyment, Dana Suisse's Blue Moonlight. Oh, just about takes your breath away. That Blue Moonlight by Dana Suisse. Jim Roseveare on the pipe organ, and myself on the piano. What a beautiful piece, and it especially was gorgeous to be playing that in that Art Deco theater, the Oakland Paramount, with its gold leaf walls and the beautiful lighting that was provided by Ed Hotchkiss, stage manager. Anyway, what a pleasure to play it and to hear it.
Well, Peter, we've had organ solos and piano and organ duets. Why don't you treat us to a piano solo?
Well, I guess if you twist my arm, I have to. Well, I think what I'd like to play is something that I had the extreme privilege and honor of playing for the man who wrote the lyrics to many of our favorite songs, Mr. Ira Gershwin, in his home. In fact, it was about 4 months before he passed away. And this is the title song from a George and Ira Gershwin score of the film Shall We Dance? And that was the film that RKO made, starring Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. It had quite a few hit songs, including They Can't Take That Away From Me, and They All Laughed, and Who's Got the Last Laugh Now? Oh, no, that is the same song, isn't it? They All Laughed, and what's that other one? And the other, I get these two mixed up. The other one would be...
Let's call
That's it. It's my addled condition today. But this is the title song. It's one of my favorites because it's not done a lot, but it has so many musical intricacies and some great chords, and it's Shall We Dance? Well, it looks like we're just about out of time, so may I say, Jim Roseveare, thank you so much for joining us on Music in the Air.
Well, thank you, Peter. It's been a pleasure.
And I'd also like to extend thanks to Peter Botto, the manager of the Oakland Paramount Theater, and to recording engineer Rob Thomas and David Fowler, and hope that you will tune in next week on Music in the Air. Thanks so much for listening.
Music in the Air, original music of the 1920s and 30s, is produced in the studios of KALW San Francisco by Betty De Losada. Your host was Peter Minton. I'm David Fowler. This broadcast comes from San Francisco.